What an emotional night. Emotional because Ukraine have won, and emotional because look at us, there we are, in the nosebleed, dizzying heights of second place. There's some relieved people back at the BBC. It looked a bit dodgy there for a minute. What, we're going to have to host?
Thanks, Graham. Late last year, I released a video looking at why the UK has been doing so shit at Eurovision lately, and what the BBC's new partnership with Tap Music could do to change that. They must have been listening, because this year they did really rather well. I'll cover where the UK can take its entries from here on out in a later video, but we have more pressing matters to deal with right now. With Ukraine sadly out of the picture for hosting next year, the BBC officially confirmed on 25th of July that they had accepted hosting duties for Eurovision 2023. With months of speculation over the home country finally over, it's time to instead start obsessing over the host city.
Viva Maria, Viva Victoria, Aphrodita.
It's Monday morning, May the 4th, 1998 in Birmingham's National Indoor Arena. 25 nations gather for the week to attempt to win the world's biggest, campest song contest.
The last time the UK hosted Eurovision was 25 years ago. To put that into perspective, back then I looked like this. Being deprived of the contest for so long clearly drove the country ravenous, as the initial list of potential cities was a long one. Up and down the country, towns with a big enough cowshed came out of the woodwork to express interest in hosting. Among them were Aberdeen, Belfast, Birmingham, Brighton, Bristol, Cardiff and Derry. Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds and Liverpool, London, Manchester, Newcastle, Nottingham and Sheffield and Sunderland and Wolverhampton.
And in alphabetical order as well, that's really impressive.
Yeah.
And then there are the wild my favourite of which is Prudhoe, a small town in Northumberland that no one's heard of. No venue exists, so I assume they either intend to host it in this old castle or Prudhoe Waterworld. Unfortunately for them, there are requirements for both the host venue and the city itself, and Prudhoe doesn't really meet any of them. So, what are these requirements?
Eurovision Song Contest 2023. Requirements of the host city and venue. Condition 1. The selected venue must have a capacity of at least around 10,000 people during the event, and enough space to house the set and equipment required for the show.
Eurovision has changed a lot since the UK were frequent hosts, and many of the show's past venues are just far too small for what the contest has become. Look, Festival Hall, you were a lovely venue for both the 1960 contest and my graduation, but you ain't big enough for Eurovision anymore. The majority of recent contests have been held in dedicated music arenas with a capacity of around 15 to 20,000. Some years far exceeded that, with 2001 and 2011 being hosted in football stadiums, but that had some cavernous results. We're ideally looking at a dedicated indoor arena for music here.
Condition 2. The selected venue must be indoors and air-conditioned, with a roof that can support camera and lighting rings, and a ceiling height of at least 15 to 18 meters.
Fight what you think, it's not just weather holding Eurovision back from being an outdoor show. With over 20 cameras and over 2,000 lights used during the production of a modern contest, there is a lot of equipment to rig. Football stadiums face another issue here, as many would need a new roof, although of course some do have a retractable one already. Now, there are other ways the roof can hold a bid back. For example, let's take a trip to Sweden, a country with a ton of suitable venues and an extremely competitive bidding process as a result. It's perhaps for this reason that this country's second city, Gothenburg, hasn't hosted since the 80s. It's not for lack of trying, as the country has hosted 4 times since, with Gothenburg bidding for most of them. The problem is with the city's venue, the Scandinavium. It's got the capacity, but because of its saddle-shaped roof, it can only take a certain load when it comes to rigging equipment, and it's held up by visible supports which limit the usable camera angles.
Condition 3. the selected venue must have, within easy access of the main hall, ample space to support additional production needs. There must also be a well-defined perimeter for security purposes.
A Eurovision venue ain't just the main hall, but must also hold a press centre, delegation spaces, dressing rooms, artist facilities, staff facilities, hospitality, audience facilities, and so much more. There must also be an area for loading and unloading big stage pieces out of trucks at the back of the arena. This is another feature the Scandinavian lacks, as trucks instead have to park further away in the arena's car park, increasing the time and manpower needed to deliver equipment. As for the security parameter, it has to cover the main hall, the press centre, and any additional spaces in the area. Not much to say about it right now, but I'll come back to it.
Condition 4. The selected venue must be available exclusively for 6 weeks before the event, 2 weeks during the show, which will take place in May, and a week after the end of the event for dismantling.
Between assembling the stage, the weeks of rehearsals for each act, and the show itself, Eurovision takes a lot to put on and will essentially book out the chosen venue for 2 months in total. There are some venues in the UK that book up years in advance and may not want to risk the lost revenue from being out of action for so long, especially after suffering through the pandemic. This is a factor that's gained notable attention from UK media as the reality of hosting begins to set in and fans dig through the event schedules of potential venues. Right now, it looks like regardless of who wins the bidding process, shows will inevitably have to be rescheduled, which is bad news for fans of Magic Mike and Josh Widdicombe.
Condition 5. The venue has to actually exist.
There are multiple arenas across the UK in planning or construction right now, and while a few of them could be fast-tracked for completion given the right funding, I don't think it's a risk the BBC would be willing to take, especially given how they're already several months behind the regular production schedule. Sure, Baku in 2012 built the Crystal Hall from scratch, and Copenhagen in 2014 converted an old shipyard for its venue, but those contests were both immensely expensive for the host broadcaster and plagued with logistical issues.
Condition 6. The selected host city must have an international airport no more than 90 minutes from the city, and over 2,000 nearby hotel rooms for arriving fans, press, and delegates.
Beyond the venue, the city itself has some extra requirements, but they're a lot simpler to go through than those of the venues. People have got to get to the venue, and they need somewhere to stay. Of course, while an airport is specifically requested, having an easy rail link to London, and by extension the rest of Europe, is a massive bonus. Generally, the easier it is for Brits to visit without a plane, the better for both accessibility and not killing the planet, more than we already are. Within the city itself, it's also helpful to have space for additional venues. A nicely sized Euro club for accredited fans and press, a nice looking space for the red carpet and opening ceremony, and a town square or public park for the Euro Village, where the general public can enjoy live performances or watch the show on a big screen as it airs. Also, since Turin edged out Bologna due to the broadcast resources Rai has located there, I think looking at what bases of operation the BBC has in the city is also worth doing. So, I'm editing this video right now, and I've got a bit of a problem, cause when I wrote the script for this video, the shortlist hadn't actually been announced yet, which means there's a lot of content I had to cut. But also, when the BBC revealed the shortlist, they also revealed a couple of extra conditions I may or may not have forgotten to consider. So let's go over them now. So here we are, Eurovision's shiny new website. Let's look at the shortlist here. And here we are. 3 shiny new criteria and this one which I've gone over in way too much detail. So, the commitment that can be made by a city or region to hosting the event, including financial contribution. Let's talk about funding. So, the way the contest is funded, most of it will come from the BBC this year. The rest will be made up from the participation fee from other countries, from sponsors, and a significant contribution will be made by the city itself. Now, Obviously, that's a big investment for a city to make, and what it could potentially get out of it is all of the tourists coming in to see the event, but also an increased awareness of the city itself. Most of the postcards in past Eurovisions have basically just been a giant advert for the host city and country as well. So it just depends on how much they can put down and how much they're willing to get out of it. Larger cities probably have quite the advantage here, especially if they're backed by a devolved government with extra powers. Also, doesn't have to just be money. The commitment to hosting also means making sure that things run as smooth as possible for the delegations, for all the guests, and making sure that the city is committed to making things as good as possible for when people get there. The strength of the cultural offer, which includes off-screen local and regional activity, as well as showcasing Ukrainian culture and music. The show is usually a lot more interesting if there's a local cultural heritage that you can draw upon. Having a strong connection to Ukraine this year is also very important. After all, we are hosting the contest on their behalf. Having a strong Ukrainian diaspora or shared cultural heritage would be quite a good thing to boost the bid. And finally, the most nebulous one, alignment with the BBC's strategic priorities as a public service broadcaster, providing value to all audiences So, supporting the creative economy in the UK, if they can do a lot of stuff locally and use Eurovision as a way to boost the creative industries in that area, that's great. The other thing, aligning with the strategic priorities, don't be London. So, that's the criteria the BBC and DPU will be using to judge the potential host cities. Already, the first round of the selection process has passed, and BBC announced the shortlist cities last Friday. Let's take a moment to remember the cities that didn't make it. Okay, thanks. Now, before we run through the shortlist, there's an elephant in the room that we need to address. Where is London? The capital city, biggest city, and my home city didn't make the shortlist, but I don't think it's that surprising. The last time Eurovision was hosted in the capital of the home country was in 2018, and with the UK continuing that trend, we're on a hot streak, only matched by the first 4 editions of the contest. As a Londoner who fucking hates capital cities, I'm conflicted. Yeah, having Eurovision less than an hour away and being able to host a bunch of friends going to the event would be great, but London as a city, I just don't think would be the greatest host. Eurovision thrives in cities that can fully embrace hosting. London is massive and hosts a major event every time someone sneezes. For years, London received the bulk of funding and attention, and as a result, both the government and the BBC have spent the last decade moving as far away from the capital as possible. Last year, this move included the UK's Eurovision team as they headed up to Salford Quays in Manchester. And then there's the 2 potential venues. The OVO Wembley would have been an interesting pick, as with the contest usually held towards the end of the Premier League season, the next door Wembley Stadium would likely be packed with overzealous football fans, inevitably resulting in a horrific clash between the gays and straights when both events end and they have to fight for the tube train home. So, what about the O2? On paper, the O2 is the perfect Eurovision venue at a capacity of around 20,000. It's the perfect size for the contest, and I've heard the acoustics and atmosphere in there are electric. It's also got multiple smaller venues within close proximity that could host the press centre and other required facilities. But here's the problem. All those venues exist within a large entertainment complex, and to host the contest there, the entire area will have to be shut off for the whole 6 weeks. Having no business for that amount of time could outright kill the shops and restaurants in there that have already been hit hard by the pandemic. Even if they could work that issue out, the venue is one of the busiest in the world, and getting it for those 6 weeks would be a big ask. It books out years in advance. It's certainly possible, but with London not exactly leading the promotion, I'm not surprised the BBC decided against making this effort. Alright then, shortlist time. Starting with
Leeds? I'm not moving to Leeds.
I'm afraid it's Leeds or nothing. Next.
Leeds, a city apparently well known for being the location where carbonated water was invented in the 1760s. A major city in the heart of Yorkshire, Leeds is an up-and-coming centre for multiple production companies and is marked as the UK City of Culture for 2023. It's also well connected to the rest of the UK via the Yorkshire Metro and the East Coast Main Line, home to its own airport, and within easy reach of Manchester International too. It also has a shiny new arena with a capacity of around 13,000. Unfortunately, despite having the capacity on paper, the first direct arena is pretty compact and a bit on the small side. But this is by design, as it's an intimate setting for concerts first and foremost. But this makes a large-scale TV spectacle like Eurovision less practical. Certainly still possible, and the city definitely has the surrounding infrastructure needed, but the limited floor space and restrictive scale would require concessions in aspects like camera work and stage design, and in the end, I don't see the BBC choosing it over other options.
What happened to the old castle?
Newcastle is a well-connected city with its own international airport linked to the city centre via the Tyne and Wear Metro, cheap trains to London via the new budget operator Lumo. They also seem to hold a great love for the contest and look ready to offer it a warm Geordie welcome. This year they even held their own Euro village right in the city centre, as hundreds gathered in Central Park to watch Sam Ryder rise up the scoreboard. Their current venue, the Utilita Arena, has a capacity of around 11,000 and just about meets the ceiling height requirement at 17.2 metres. It does also seem to be reaching the end of its life, as a new arena across the river in Gateshead will soon be replacing it, offering a high capacity and a new exhibition centre. However, that won't open until 2024. Unless construction is fast-tracked, but I've already explained why that's bad, so it looks like we're stuck with this giant corrugated shed of nightmares should Newcastle win the bid.
Sheffield for the Eurovision!
Sheffield was a city at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, still famed for its steel production. It shares this industrial heritage with the sadly now war-torn Ukrainian city of Donetsk, with which it has been twinned since 1956. In 2007, the city also became the UK's first designated city of sanctuary, providing a safe place for refugees, with the city priding itself on its hospitality. They would be more than a worthy host for a Ukrainian contest, and thankfully they have the infrastructure to back them up. In addition to Doncaster Sheffield Airport, the city is also easily served by East Midlands, Leeds Bradford and Manchester International airports. Train services here run direct to London St Pancras International, which in turn provides services to Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam. Within the city itself are not just trams but super trams, with a stop located right next to the venue. The other Utilita Arena has a very nice capacity of 13,500. Also not far from the arena is the English Institute of Sport Sheffield, which would be a great location for the press centre, although it does require a walk through the Olympic Legacy Park to get there. Sheffield has a decent bit infrastructure wise, but the selling point here is clearly the city's atmosphere and connections with Ukraine.
We shall be known simply as the Beatles!
Liverpool loves to bang on about its musical history, mainly off the back of the Beatles. They even named their airport after one of them, and like Leeds, they also have Manchester Airport nearby to increase capacity. There are also direct trains to Manchester, Birmingham and London city centres, and the Merseyrail metro system, home to the oldest deep level stations in the world. and the first to be accessed by lift, opened in 1886 as the terminus of the Mersey Railway Tunnel and converted into a through station in 1892 with the opening of Liverpool Central, James Street Station. Liverpool is also home to the ACC, made up of the Emirates Bank Arena and the Exhibition Centre Liverpool, taking up the same building on the bank of the River Mersey. Having an arena and convention centre so close to each other and right in the city centre is kind of a perfect fit for Eurovision. It's only 15 years old too, which is relatively shiny for this kind of venue. Overall, I'd say Liverpool are in with a shout, and this is a relatively solid bid all around.
Let's ride.
Birmingham has chosen not to nominate the venue in which they hosted the 1998 contest, but instead has cleared out the schedule for the Resorts World Arena in the National Exhibition Centre. It may be far from the city centre, but it still has a lot close by to make it a great venue. The surrounding area contains a convention hall for the press centre and other facilities, in addition to an entertainment centre to keep visitors busy. It's also right next door to the Birmingham International Airport, which has its own rail station on the West Coast main line between Brum City Centre and London. Birmingham also has a lot going for it right now, with the Commonwealth Games kickstarting a self-proclaimed decade of events for the city, which they obviously want Eurovision to be part of. The Games have also proven the city's ability to broadcast such an event, and the BBC has its Midlands base right in the city centre. Birmingham was also recently host of a charity concert for Ukraine, at which Eurovision winner Jamala was one of the stunning performers, which would make them a natural proxy host for the country. As for why they're not in the top 2, it simply comes down to the fact that they've hosted the contest before, and were even the most recent UK city to do so, whereas most cities in contention have yet to have their chance. It's time to look at the cities that are due hosting more than any others. My personal top 2, Glasgow and Manchester. But both of those cities are quite far up north, and I'm such a Londoner that my idea of heading up north is a day trip to Milton Keynes. So, to help write these segments and provide footage for me, I brought in a couple of friends. First off, it's my new co-writer for these videos, Hannah. You'll still hear my voice though, sorry. Anyway, in second place is the city of
Manchester.
On the 6th day, God created Manchester. At least that's what the locals say. I can only assume that she spent the 7th day binge watching old ST Laos, since Eurovision and Manchester seem like a match made in heaven. Manchester is known as a hive of activity with a worker bee mindset, hence the bees everywhere. It also has a huge music scene, a huge multicultural population, and arguably the UK's biggest LGBT+ scene outside the south of England, which are all the ingredients necessary to create a city hungry for the latest Moldovan train-based folk to light up its streets. Speaking of which, Manchester is extremely well connected by rail, with high-speed trains linking Piccadilly Station to London, Scotland and beyond, and Victoria Station also providing local services to the area from Liverpool and Yorkshire, together with an international airport, all joined together by the country's largest tram network, the Metrolink. Getting to and around Manchester is super easy, and one of its biggest strong points. It has the facilities too, such as Britain's largest indoor arena, the 21,000-seater AO Arena, which is unfortunately most known for the tragic events of the 2017 suicide bombings. Perhaps hosting Eurovision can be a way to show the city is back on its feet. It is currently scheduled to receive some much needed refurbishments, which may get in the way of its hosting ambitions. But with construction not yet started and events still scheduled for the period, I feel as though that they could just delay it and this may just end up as a non-issue. A potentially bigger problem may be finding a suitable press centre close to the venue, as there isn't really a dedicated conference centre at the arena, which is blocked in by both city streets and the nearby Victoria Station. I guess if all else fails, they could just close off the car park and use that. It's probably worth mentioning that the AO is soon to be surpassed as both Manchester and the UK's largest at the end of 2023 by another arena located on the city's eastern fringes, the Co-op Live presumably their second choice of name after the Little Palace, will have a capacity of over 23,000 and multiple bars and lounge areas that can easily be converted into a press centre. While it likely won't be ready for the contest, it's worth keeping in the back of your mind when considering Manx's current option. Now, Eurovision is a party that takes hold of the whole city for a week, and man can Manchester throw a party. Piccadilly Gardens recently hosted its own Eurovillage during the Women's Euros, which Hannah was there for. And the gay village in Canal Street can handle crowds of drunk Lithuanians stepping outside the Euro Club in its stride. For a bigger Euro Club venue, there is the O2 Victoria Warehouses, a bit further out from the city. Round that way is also the Media City in Salford Quays, home to the BBC's main base of operations and where the UK's Eurovision delegation currently resides. Another big event to consider is the opening ceremony, which needs a nice location to roll out the Dulux paint-covered carpet. Media City would also work for that, but so would the Science and Industry Museum. All in all, Manchester would be the perfect host city. Fantastic atmosphere, bundles of history and culture, and luckily, given it's an indoor event, the weather won't really be a consideration at all. The current arena situation might hold the city's ambitions back a bit, but I still think this is by far one of the strongest bids in contention. One more city left. Thank you to Callum for writing the script for this one. Here we go. It is Glasgow. Glasgow is currently sitting right at the top of the odds, and it's for good reason. Let's start with transport, as much like the rest of the shortlist, it is incredibly well connected to the rest of the UK and beyond. Glasgow has two airports. The main one is served by a regular bus route to the city centre, while the smaller Glasgow Prestwick is about an hour away on ScotRail. There are also plenty of regular connections to Edinburgh, which for many may be cheaper and more convenient to fly into. Beyond just Edinburgh, Glasgow Central provides rail connections to most of the UK throughout the day. Night bus enjoyers like Callum can also express themselves nationally to and from Buchanan bus station in the heart of the city centre. Within the city centre is the Glasgow Metro's admittedly quite limited single line, backed up by a slightly more extensive network of buses and suburban rail services. As for the venue, the whole SEC campus is a logistical godsend. Take the central location and smorgasbord of facilities offered by the Liverpool's ominous Bank Arena, then drop the BBC Scotland HQ just across the Clyde and you have a venue that the EBU must be slavering over the prospect of hosting in. Within the campus is of course the OVO Hydro, where the event itself would be held. Already familiar to Eurofans as the venue of the contest in the Netflix movie, the venue has a very nice capacity of 14,500, with a unique amphitheatre inspired design, giving the whole audience a fantastic view wherever they sit, while still providing a good amount of floor space, unlike its Leeds counterpart. To the side is the SEC itself, where all the press and media events can be held. The Armadillo! Arguably the architectural pinnacle of the campus can also be used for whatever the EBU has up its sleeve, maybe the green room. The campus itself is also super easy to get to, served by its own train station and multiple bus routes, with even more being added during the recent COP26 summit. Surely that's something for the powers that be to consider for this event too. Now, despite its great reputation, Glasgow is one of the most vibrant and socially progressive places in the UK, and the people pride themselves on being incredibly friendly and welcoming, especially after a few drinks. The comparatively cheap prices, the city's cosmopolitan nature, and the whole array of things to do make for an unforgettable night out. Put it this way, you're unlikely to find someone who prefers the nightlife in Edinburgh. I'm taking Callum's word on this one. Eurofans will be glad to know that Glasgow's gay scene is well and truly alive, with venues like Polo, AXM, Delmonica's, Katie's Bar, Bonjour, and the appropriately named Waterloo all having their individual charms and flares. Just down the road from the Hydro is one of the largest and most beloved venues in Glasgow, the SWG3, which has more than enough capacity to host an onslaught of Eurovision aficionados at the Euro Club. And there's even more to explore during the day. The West End's Victorian-era buildings are home to a plethora of chic independent shops, cafes and bars, with the Great Western Road in particular having been recently named the coolest street in the UK by Time Out. With the glorious green spaces of Kelvin Grove Park and the Botanic Gardens nearby, it's a beautiful area to spend the day. Plus there's the Kelvin Grove Art Galleries, the Gallery of Modern Art, the Riverside Museum and the newly renovated People's Palace, which are all beautiful places to delve into Glaswegian and world history for free. In the south of the city and easily accessible by all available modes of transport is Pollock Country Park, which would be an idyllic, classy and simply gorgeous place to host the opening ceremony. There's plenty of space and room for delegates and spectators alike, with Pollock House in the middle of the park providing a beautiful interior for glamorous photo shoot moments just like the Palace for Venaria did in Turin. Pollock Country Park isn't alone, as the house for an art lover in Bella Houston Park gives off the same gorgeous vibes. The south side in general has become a really good place in recent years and is worth a visit, just like the West End. Eurovillages, man, you don't even know how many places there are that can become Eurovillages. George Square, Merchant City and Glasgow Green are all central locations that have previously hosted fan zones for events such as the 2014 Commonwealth Games and the 2020 Euros, with Glasgow Green also hosting the annual Trundlement Festival. Virtually any other green space or public square in the middle of Glasgow could be eligible. Overall, Glasgow would be a fantastic host and my personal pick for the #1 spot. But in the end, the choice ain't up to me, and the 7 cities now have until the 8th of September to submit their updated bid books. From there, the BBC's team will likely be visiting all of the cities and venues to scrutinise the heck out of the proposals. It won't be until autumn that we find out, so until then, all we can do is bicker about it. But a Eurovision with just a venue would be odd. So before I wrap up, let's forget about the host city for a bit and talk about the hosts. I've seen a few people worried about the possibility that James Corden would get the gig, but I think Jack Whitehall would be someone else that could potentially raise eyebrows. Now, listen, no hate to the guy whatsoever. He clearly loves Eurovision and has been an advocate for it for years. He also has a bunch of experience with hosting the Brits several years in a row, except his presenting style at that show didn't exactly go down the best with some, and I think he would be a pick that somewhat divides people. My personal choice would be Mel Gedroych. I adore her to bits, and while she's not got the most experience hosting massive live events, she's still a well-respected presenter with bags of charm and serious comedic chops. Not to mention she's been involved with the contest several times before, and she can speak French. Of course, the UK has a lot of options. Obviously, Scott Mills, Ryan Clark and Graham Norton would be great picks if they feel like skipping commentary for a year, since the contest has been a lot more involved since Wogan did the double. But Radio 1 has a lot of great options beyond just Scott, should the BBC wish to reach a younger audience. Clara Amfo and Jack Saunders are good shouts, with Clara hosting multiple award shows and Jack giving platforms to artists within the Eurovision bubble like Jogie Jones, who competed in this year's Australian selection. If Manchester gets hosting duties, then bringing on AJ Adudu, who presented our votes from there this year, will be wonderful, while Lorraine Kelly as a Scottish host is almost too delightful to imagine. I would of course want the UK host to be paired up with one from Ukraine too. Timur, who commentates for the country and hosted in 2017, would be an obvious pick. If the BBC wanted to go the route of 2013 and give us a dedicated green room host, then Sam Ryder continuing his role of Mr. Congeniality could work, as could involving a star from Drag Race UK. Wait, Alison Hammond? How did I forget Alison Hammond? Please. It'd be a beautiful mess. Be worth it. Just do it. I also have a few ideas for the creative direction of the contest, taking inspiration from Ukrainian embroidery patterns and infusing it with the local identity of whatever the host city may be. For Glasgow, I incorporated elements of tartan, while for Manchester I created a honeycomb pattern that represents the city's worker bee culture. The patterns can change in both colour and style to reflect the culture of each country and map onto the stage to create each country's flag. This stage is a work in progress, by the way, although as tempting as it would be to return to the safe hands of Florian Vida again after what happened with Italy's stage, I hope they pick out a British or Ukrainian stage designer, as both countries have a lot of talent. Anyway, for the postcards, I took inspiration from the 2011 contest to represent the people and culture of the UK, Ukraine and each competing country. On one side of the screen would be a member of the competing country's diaspora living in the UK. On the other would be a Ukrainian refugee living in said country. They will be taking part in different versions of the same activity until maybe the country's flag is formed, uniting the two halves of the screen. Unite will be the key phrase of the contest, both taken from the United Kingdom's name and echoing Eurovision's key mission statement. Yes, it's a contest created to unite a war-torn continent, but cheering on our country's act unites us in a way too. Heck, I found so many of the people I now consider friends because of the contest, and after so many years of Eurovision being considered a joke over here, seeing the whole of the UK united in their excitement about hosting the contest is just pure magic. Whoever ends up hosting, bring on next May.